pretty grizzly. I guess I should turn that on too. It's recorder taking.
I know. Door. Want to shut the doors or?
No, Kelly's gone.
Okay.
That's weird.
What?
It changed where the banner is.
Yeah. Okay, whoa. And the audience is now deaf. My headset was coming on.
There we go. We're back. Hey, Patreons.
Hello. I'm hitting buttons.
Did you boop a button? Should I say hi, Patreons, again in case it didn't get the first time?
No, we notes. Ah, there we are.
There he is. I'm going to go check that. Make sure something's not screwed up. So I'm going to pause and restart.
Okay.
No, that went back. Oh, it's back to the right frame rate.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, Patreons again.
Yeah. In case we do, I may delete the first piece. Not that there was anything said. The screen was acting up on us. So in case you haven't figured out, you're there. Actually, let's see if I can get my finger in the right direction. Up. You're up here somewhere. And right here is a monitor we look at. Mm-hmm. And it has little messages up that says, okay, we're shooting, we're recording, we're 32 seconds in. We've got 3 battery bars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And 4 hours to go.
Yeah, it's big chip. Big chip. Anyhow, and we started it all up, and it went.
Yeah.
Reminds me of Gunner when you say, "Gunner, get the food."
He's a goof.
He is. Okay, well.
We hit
Patrons,
record.
You know, we're on record, so we're going to start a show. We're going to start
105.
Yeah, we are going to commence with show 105. No, it's 105.
That's what I did. I did 105.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay. I can sign. Do you want me to sign the show? We had lunch today.
This is the shenanigans we get involved before we record.
Yes. So, anywho, are you going to start? As I recall, I started last show, but I leave that up to you.
I'll start this show.
Did you actually start recording?
Yes, I boobited a button.
Okay, you did.
I'm going to start off about Warren's new purchase.
Okay.
Because we really didn't discuss this too much before we hit record.
No, we didn't. If you haven't figured it out, this is going to be a very freestyle show, folks.
Yes. Let's see here. Something like that. You know what? We're just gonna have some fun with this.
I'm over here playing my microphone arm bass.
And for those of you following along on the home game, I did not eat my Reese cup yet.
That's been 2 weeks ago.
Yes. It's mine now.
Yeah.
Ready? Hey, Jeebles, and welcome to another episode of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. It is your slapstick parts guy helming the controls today on what's sure to be a epic episode of 105 of your favorite Jeep podcast. As always, I'm the slapstick parts guy that is on a continual mission to derail poor Kevin's train of thought until I need him, and then I shut up really quickly. So with that, sitting directly across from me, digging something out of his eye, is going to be...
Hi, I'm Kevin, and I'm going to slap the stick shortly, but if necessary. No, I'm Kevin, the engineer, the guy who actually reads the instructions, uses the correct tools when I can, and follows those instructions, and usually get really good results from it. Mm-hmm. And so we are on show, you said 105, with that rather disjointed intro.
So disjointed.
I think I overfed him lunch. We went down to Wayback Burgers. I don't know if you have them in our areas, but they're a multi-year themed, and they've got a little section that's the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and
the best part is my hand smells like cheeseburger still. Yeah. So while we will share what worked with us as well as what didn't, remember it's always up to you to do your research. read the instructions, and follow them.
Please follow them. That usually works better that way.
Hey, I actually remembered something.
You did. I'm impressed.
Other than my Reese cup that's been sitting here for 2 weeks.
Well, yeah. Okay. So, you and we ended the show last 2 weeks ago with a teaser or two, or maybe three, about...
Well, we tease a lot, actually.
Yeah, we do. We do. Sorry about that. But, but you wanted to lead off discussing how you, not me, you have been helping a fellow Jeeper with some purchases and upgrades.
Yeah, and actually I want to say a big thank you to Warren, because he joined the Jeep life and the Jeep family after driving a full-size Titan, and we got to talking many months ago, and just like anything else, he wanted to trade up, and it's 3 years, he wanted a new vehicle, and he's very astute with his research. He takes his time and looks at things, and he doesn't really go into things, just half into it. He goes whole hog into it. And I made the comment many moons ago saying, man, why don't you look at a Gladiator? Oh, I don't want a Jeep. No, I don't want a Jeep. Okay, well, you say that, but the Titan that you paid $60,000 for and have now driven off the lot is now worth nowhere near that. Jeeps hold their value. You don't really want a full-size truck anymore. He never really used it as a full-size truck. The only thing he hauled was him and his dog. And, he lifted it, two-wheel drive, and it was a really nice truck. I'm not going to take any way away from that, but he was looking at another Pro 4X Titan. Glass roof, LED headlamps. He was going to lift it, and all this kind of stuff. And I made the comment, I said, man, why pay $60,000 for a glass roof when you can get a Gladiator?
And take the roof off.
And just take the roof off and fold it back. Well, I don't want all that kind of work. So I brought my Gladiator to work one day, and I said, look, click, click, flume, and then 3 seconds, see, the top was off, or at least back. And he's like, is that easy? I'm like, yeah, it's that easy. And then we put it back real quickly, and he walked around setting and goes, this isn't too bad. And I said, no, this is actually a really nice vehicle when you get to know it. And he started doing more research, and of course he started asking me about lift kits and stuff like that, and that's where
nobody has a bigger market share on lift kits than the Jeeps.
He is a customizer, and I told him, I said, man, anything you want you can find for this Jeep, and so basically, he didn't make a long story short, too late, he purchased himself a black Rubicon Gladiator. It's a clone of mine. It is almost exactly as mine, except he has the painted fender options and a couple of option differences. But other than that, it is a clone for clone research. And the cool thing is, I kind of started doing my own research about things, because again,
before you answered him, you wanted to.
Like we do. I reached out, and then everyone. I constantly see the thread, and I don't even click on them anymore because it's almost like clickbait. What can you do to put 35s on a stock Rubicon? Well, it turns out nothing. You can bolt 35s without wheel spacers onto the Rubicon, and no issues, no rubbing. Some have had issues if you had the Sport with the front little deflector on the bumper thing, but again, they're bolting right in. It's best to get the 11.5 wide tire, which Nitto has.
Right.
Just came out with a mud terrain.
A little bit narrower, so 1 inch narrower than your traditional 12.5, so it doesn't rub in some places.
Yeah, and again, I started doing some research. I started looking at lifts. Of course, we're looking at we'll call them the big three, for lift companies. And so I called Will over at Metal Cloak, and I said, hey, buddy is looking at this, and I saw on your instructions, big old bold letters, if you're going to retain the factory shocks or any shocks, you cannot run factory wheels. You have to put spacers on. And he didn't want to run spacers. And again, we're trying to, when we get to that point, not use spacers either. But I was like, why is that? If they can run factory 35s on the factory wheels and no spacers, why all of a sudden do we have to? It doesn't matter if you use their shock brackets or anything. So I called him, and he said, well, the shock brackets that you use push the shock away from the frame. Kind of give it a push out. Well, it's going to contact the tire. You'll grind your tire down to nothing if you do not use a spacer. Made sense. So we found another brand. So I found they keep talking about it on the Gladiator forums, Clayton. Okay. Clayton lift kits. Let me give them a call too. So I called Adam over there, talking to them for a little bit. And it was actually very interesting having a conversation, because I said, hey, didn't say who we were, but I did let slip one thing, saying, we usually tell our listeners to call manufacturers. hey, and get information. And again, I don't prophesize who we are.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, that's really smart. I wish more people would do that because we want you to be happy as an end customer.
Yeah.
So
let's face it, a bad review because you didn't read their instructions, it doesn't help anybody.
No, it doesn't. And again, same thing with Metal Cloak. When I talked to them, they said the same thing. Yes, please call us. So it's across the board of any manufacturer. And you made a comment yourself, is that they're there for that reason. Like you just said.
That's why they have a 1-800 number.
That's why they have a 1-800 number, and they want you to. But one of the cool things, again, you don't think about, because, again, coming from the JK world, went into the Gladiator world. Again, I thought I had done some of my research. Whoops. I was worried about front drive shafts.
Yep.
And I started talking to Adam, and he's like, well, the same question. Do you use brackets on your shocks? He goes, no, we don't necessarily need to use brackets on our shocks. And, some manufacturers require them. But our attitude is, your limitations will be your shock, blah, blah, blah. You guys can read that. But he brought up another interesting point that I hadn't thought of. Because I said, hey, you might need a drive shaft. And he goes, well, why would I need a drive shaft? Well, me thinking like JK, well, it spins all the time. It's at the end of that.
When you change the handle, the Rapaza joint doesn't handle it real well.
It's at its serviceable limits.
Yeah.
And I looked at that, and Adam made a great point. He's like, that drive shaft doesn't spin like it does in our JK, because remember, you have the center axle disconnect.
Yep.
Didn't even think about that. And I'm like, oh my goodness. He goes, yeah, some of our people have not replaced the drive shaft. Of course, you're not going to get full suspension articulation, because that will be a limiting factor. But if you don't
wheel it a lot, you probably can get by with the Rapaza shaft.
Exactly. And so I was like, So moving forward from that, I learned some things, and two, it was like, okay, wow, that actually worked. So again, as we tell what works and what didn't, I learned some things.
Yeah.
Some things I didn't even think about, to be honest with you.
Well, who better to give you an answer about a product than the guy who's making it?
Exactly. and that's the best part. And the cool thing was, it wasn't painful. I didn't have to. It didn't cost me anything.
No, he didn't probably ask you for an email address or a phone number, so he can start bombarding you with. He probably offered.
Well, and that's the thing we talked about. The point I wanted to make earlier is I hadn't spent a penny yet.
Yep.
And they were willing to offer up information. Hey, both of them said the same thing.
Last show, I was talking about that very same thing when I was dealing with Dynatrack for
your axle with Keith's question.
Answering Zach's question.
Sorry, Zach.
Well, no. So that was the whole thing. Is that they're. I'm not going to say that everyone's that way, but I'm going to say the vast majority of manufacturers would rather you call and talk to them and get honest answers. Even if you decide not to buy their product, you at least have made an informed decision. So, no, it's I practice what I preach. I probably burn up more hours on the phone to different manufacturers going, oh God, it's him again.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that and they both ended this conversation the same way. Hey, you have any more questions? Let me know. Here's my email address.
Yep.
And again, I walked into this thinking I'm going to need to buy brackets, I'm going to need to buy a drive shaft, I'm going to need to buy all this, because to be honest with you, I'm using my friend's Jeep as a test mule for when I lift the Gladiator, so I got time on my end.
Right.
He also, like with my LJ, his favorite color in the world is black, and he bought a black Gladiator. Like I bought a red LJ.
Yeah, I get it.
But he's like, I want to wrap it too. I'm like, good, we're going to use yours. Well, what do you mean? I'm going to learn on yours first. Here you go. We're going to learn,
Yep.
But again, it's very interesting. So again, I can't say it enough, but make sure you do your research before you look in it, because had I not called, I would have probably bought a drive shaft and things I hadn't needed, thinking that, I know what I'm doing. Nope.
Well, I laugh because if you do, you know that Shane will support us immensely.
Of course.
Especially drive shafts here in Tampa will make drive shafts. And I'll repeat this again. I still am blown away. You go online, if you have one of the, shall we call it, older generation Willys, which uses the pencil shafts, or even the early CJs with the pencil shafts. Those are the little tiny drive shafts that are maybe an inch in diameter, and that's the big piece.
Yeah.
Shane at Specialty Drive Shaft will repair or build those drive shafts, and he's very open to telephone orders and stuff like that. So if you're out there in the recon market trying to reconstruct these old rigs, and you're sitting here looking at the onlines of, and I'll just give you a for instance. I know I looked up the front drive shaft for a 53 CJ3A. And if you wanted to buy one that was supposed to be good, it was somewhere between $550 and $600.
Yeah.
And we took John's down and dropped it off with Shane. I said, Shane, can you fix this? Shane, and he's like, yeah, why? That was an awful easy yeah. He goes, yeah. Mm-hmm. I said, okay. Total bill out the door with new parts, new universal joints, replaced the slip yoke spline and slip yoke carrier, both sides of it.
Right.
Balanced and painted, $250.
Yeah. And you have your original part that you started out with.
And you still have the original. Now, granted, the slip yoke end, which, goes at one end of the shaft, is replaced because there's no way to re-spline it, the old one. But it's got a Spicer branded slip yoke back on it. And so, it's the same thing the Army would have done had it been shredded.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so I was very surprised. So there are specialty people out there if you get stuck too. So that's just one of those things. Calling and asking the question. The worst they're going to do is go, nope.
Well, speaking of calling and asking questions, again, that's one thing that I actually felt good about is when Warren asked me these questions again to help him, because coming from the Titan and the mini trucking world like I used to, he took that knowledge of saying, hey, where do I go? Where do I start? And I told him, I said, well, this is the tire brand you like, call him. And he's a shy person, and he heard me calling. He called up and got the specs on his tires.
Yep.
I said, make sure to ask for how much they weigh. Guiding him to do his own research. Mm-hmm. And I get a text message before we start recording. Guess who ordered his tires already?
Woohoo!
So we're going to see if 35s really do fit with that lift,
and without rubbing. And a lot of it, again, as we were discussing coming back from lunch, a lot of it depends on what you consider wheeling.
Yeah.
And that's a very personal choice. But to get on to our other teaser items, which was kind of the wrench fest we had last time.
Yes.
And this time, I'm going to be honest with you, it was a little bit limited between two Jeeps, Scott's and mine.
Yeah.
And not Dory's, but Scott's and mine.
Yeah, I need to show Mike. I've nicknamed them temporarily until we fixed it. It was Clank.
Clank, yes. Yeah. Well, it definitely clanked. It could have also been named Drip. It could have also been named... Instead of Snap, Crackle, Pop, it was Rattle, Clank, and Bang.
No, Drip, Drip, Crackle, and... No, forget it. You had the right idea.
That's it. It was probably Drip, Squeak, and Bang, or Drip, Slike, and Clank.
Yeah,
God, I can't even say it now. You got me going.
It's what I do.
That's very true. So let's start with the easy one, which was supposed to be mine. Mm-hmm. And folks, what I have is, of course, slightly altered. Runs the 4-liter, slightly altered, with the one non-slightly altered component and slightly altered, and that is a 42 RLE automatic transmission. It's a 4-speed based off of the old Torque Flight 727, modified obviously, and I changed my fluid. It tells me, and we'll get to the why, it tells me when it's time to change fluid.
Yeah.
And people are like, how does it do that? It doesn't have a light, it doesn't have a sensor. No, and it also has one other thing. It doesn't want to go in reverse when it's cold, when the fluid needs changing.
Yeah.
And Scott came over and we pulled the pan. I have the optional skid pan that goes in front of the automatic in addition to the belly pan. And we dropped the pan, and the oil's dark red, but it's red. Okay. It's not burnt, which I was very thankful for. Everything looked normal. The pan was relatively clean. There were some clutch material, the black, but there was no man glitter whatsoever in there.
Which is the important part.
And when I say some, I mean you could still see the magnet. That's how little there was.
Yeah.
And there was a general quizzical look in Scott's eye. And
as there always is.
And I said, and it boiled down to, well, why are you changing that? And I realized that a lot of people don't realize. Boy, I doubled that up, didn't I?
That's all right.
Getting my moids wixed. A lot of people don't realize that the limiting factor in most Chrysler automatic transmissions isn't the fluid. It's the filter.
Right. Let me add real quickly.
Yeah.
I wasn't asking why you were changing it. I knew why you were changing it, but not knew why. Sorry, I knew why you're supposed to change it, but why at 30,000 rather than 60?
Okay.
That's what I meant to say. Sorry.
And this is why. If you have a Chrysler, I'm going to say anytime after the early 90s, okay, and even some before that, some of the 80s, but pretty much I know in 90 they started going, the 727 started coming out with this later version of a filter.
Right.
And I'm just deliberately kind of working around to get a point across. And that filter really was an improvement for the life of the transmission. And I still say that. However, there's a trade-off to everything. And what that improvement is the filter material. If you guys who do have an automatic in your Jeep, what do you call it, a juice box, whatever you want to call it.
Slush box,
that's up to you. Next time you change that filter, before you throw it away, before you stick the new one on, put it on a shop towel because it's going to bleed. But look at the media through the little hole and look at your new one, and you'll realize it's not a filter screen. The predominant filter, automatic transmission intakes are fine mesh screens, and they're good, but they're not great because obviously anything smaller than that screen, whoop, right through it.
Get right through it.
All right. And then if it goes through that, it's got to go into the pump. If it goes into the pump, it goes into the torque converter. It goes into the bands, into the clutches, into the gears.
And it's like we talked about last time, when you get your fingers, sometimes that fine media becomes an ultra-fine valve grind compound.
Yeah, an abrasive. Well, Chrysler switched over to let's call it a fabric. It's really not a fabric. It's but it's a felted media.
Right.
And it has a really outstanding filtering ability. But that also means that it really clogs up and restricts flow if you're not careful.
Right.
Hence, when the Jeep is cold and I start it up and I put it in reverse and it sits there and goes, oh, you want to go in reverse? Well, yeah, if you insist. Thunk.
Right.
That's a clear sign that I'm having a harder time drawing the colder transmission fluid up through the filters into the, and filling the accumulator assembly to then drop the clutch in. Now, once it warms up, it's fine. I'm not running it, folks, until it fails. This is just, the hint of a hesitation going into reverse, because as soon as I change the filters, and while I'm there, I'm going to drain the oil and change the oil anyway, immediately she goes into gear, smooth as can be, hot or cold, no problem. And so this is a case where the service cycle for the transmission is not necessarily driven by the fluid itself. We all think of, change your oil, it's getting dirty.
Right.
But it might be, the service cycle might be based upon the life of the filter. And so you look at some of these situations where your service cycle says under extreme duty.
Just operating a Jeep is extreme duty.
And that's the point, is maybe just driving a Jeep on a 42 RLE.
Well, because the 42 RLEs, they've been known to be hot boxes.
They have. They are hot boxes. In fact, my temperature gauge dropped after I changed the filter.
I don't know.
And so for me, that's a simple thing. Now, if you do have a Jeep with a 42 RLE, it's it's 13 bolts. If you have the optional skid pan, add 4. Okay. Yeah. So you got 17 bolts to get to it, and then 2 torque screws to hold the filter on. There's no reason not to change it.
Yeah, and you don't need a monkey paw that gasket, which we'll get to later.
Yeah.
It's just very, very, what inch pounds?
Yeah, it was inch pounds for the tightness on that. I don't remember off the top of my head, folks, but somewhere around the 45 to 55, 60 inch pounds.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that, little Scott says, on another subject. So we finished up and then went out and did a test drive on it. Everything was happy. I did have to add a little more fluid. Theoretically, the book says, well, it should be about 4 quarts. Well, a lot of that depends on how long you let it drain. If you're crazy enough to take the filter off and leave the pan off and go, oh, I'm going to go have dinner, and then forget it and come back the next day, it might be 6 quarts.
Yeah.
Because it will continue to drain out of the accumulator. Your torque converter is full of fluid, but it will continue to drain slowly until it's below the level of the main shaft coming through where the seal is, and you can actually lose a lot more. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to be prepared to add. I had brought in 5 quarts. It took 4.5 to fill mine back up again. And remember that once you do an automatic, you fill it. It's okay for it initially to look low. Get in, start it, shift it through all the gears, and wait until you feel it actually go into gear. So you start with reverse, neutral, drive, first and second, and then back to park. And actually, I did it 2 or 3 times, that sequence, because what you're doing is you're pushing out all the air bubbles. And then put it in park, and then go check it with it running. And then check to make sure you're between your marks. And that's when I realized, when we did it the first time, I pulled the dipstick out and go, oh, it's barely wet at the tip of the dipstick.
And it doesn't mean it's not like an engine oil. You don't add a quart.
It's not a quart between dipsticks. It's about between a cup and a pint, depending on where you're talking about. So it's little bits, little tiny bits. So mine was not a massive service, but it was an important one.
Well, and that's the thing, again, coming from the dealership world.
Yep.
And that's one thing I want to talk with Kevin about, that we talked a little bit about when we first brought up the subject. A lot of times they'll call it a Prendel service or a box of wine, or also known as a machine transmission service.
Right.
And they use a machine to circulate and pump all 13 quarts of fluid in.
In theory.
And I actually did it twice on the JK, The caveat is, if you're going to do this, have them do the filter too, because I didn't even think about the filter starvation.
Yeah, you when you do a strictly machine flush, and what they do, folks, is they hook up a line on your cooler circuit. They disconnect it from the cooler and put a fitting in between there, and they basically, as the transmission is pumping fluid out, they capture that and it goes to a waste tank, and they dump fluid in through the same cooler port, into the radiator, and it goes on through the rest of the path. And it does a very good job to a point of flushing out a lot of the contaminants. It does not, and this, Scott, I'm sorry to say this, it does not 100% replace the fluid.
Right.
Because the new fluid goes in, and you have a bulk area called the torque converter that's full of fluid as it's spinning, and it mixes in the torque converter, and it dilutes the old fluid.
Right.
And then the funny thing is, you almost immediately start pumping out the diluted mix of new and old fluid. And all you can do is run it until the dilution level gets down to where they're happy with it.
Yeah.
The only way to truly change 100% of transmission fluid is blow it apart. And even then, unless the torque converter had a drain plug on it, you're never going to get that dry.
Yeah.
But we're now splitting hairs at that point. But those flushes are good. They're great if you somehow have water contamination, and this happens more than you know. What do you mean? Didn't you read that that's an ATF plus 4, and you put in ATF or Mercon or Universal, and your transmission's not shifting right now?
Yeah.
Those kind of flushes are really good for that. You can run it through and run it through and run it through. I think it's over 10 quarts of fluid for 100% flush, and it might take 20 quarts to actually flush out to a reasonable level. But they do not change the filter unless you specifically ask for them to drop the pan and change the filter.
Knowing that now, again, because the flush saved my bacon with the JK transmission, because 7,000 miles after doing it, the torque converter let go. Now, that wasn't the fluid's fault.
No, but you were showing that you had good service records.
I had good service records. So the thing that I'm kind of interested in, because the first thing I did is when I got the Gladiators, I read what's the transmission service, because I know on the Charger it had the same 8-speed transmission. No service records. It was a fill for life, go till it drives bang kind of scenario. I looked at the Gladiator and no service recommendation, which means they're calling it the fill for life.
And is that even a removable pan?
It is a removable pan with no drain plug.
And is there a part number for? Well, that's no drain plug's pretty.
There
typical.
is a filter.
Okay,
I did look. There is a filter, but the interesting thing is that there's no dipstick. It's one of those you have to fill it at a certain, and it has to be at the window of exactly 197 degrees. I'm using the Lexus terminology for this one right now, but a lot of our Lexus vehicles has to be exactly at 197 degrees for the expansion of fluid. You got a small window.
Yep.
You literally open the side of the case with like a manual transmission.
Yeah.
You have the fill plug and the drain plug, and the minute if you're at 197 degrees, if it weeps out, close it. You're good. If it's not, add till it weeps out of the hole. Mm-hmm. But then you run the risk of the transmission getting over full because you went to 200 degrees.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. And that's going to be a challenge. But, you know, the idea of the Fill for Life is that seals have gotten so good that they're not worried about contaminants going in there. Yeah. And the filter is only there to catch particulates from the band wearing. And hopefully they've sized it, quote unquote, that the filter has enough capacity for dirt or band material for the, well, let's just say the warranty.
Yeah.
Not the life of the transmission, but the warranty period.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't see any reason that changing wouldn't be a bad thing. Here's what I would suggest if I was doing that, Scott, for you.
Right.
Start out with a clean catch pan, dry, clean catch pan. Mm-hmm. And then drop the transmission pan, but put everything into that pan. And then measure it. And put back in what you took out.
Yeah,
volumetrically.
Again, that's a great idea too. But again, sometimes it's best just to say, "Hey, how much is a transmission service when you replace the filter?" Again, a lot of times, I think it's kind of crazy when everyone says it's $140 to drain your differential at a dealership. I will be the first one to go, "Yep, yeah, I agree with that." Yep. It is ridiculous because it's a drain plug and a fill plug, and that's me working in the business.
But
the transmission stuff?
Yeah, but even the differentials, if you are not familiar with what you're looking at,
okay. You know, fair enough.
Then maybe it's worth it. Okay, a lot of people don't have the tools. A lot of people don't know. See, you're already used to the fact. Oh, okay, we fill that plug until it weeps out the high plug, and the bottom plug's for draining. And
remove the top plug first.
Remove the top plug first. You don't have to, but it drains a lot quicker. Well, otherwise, it goes all over the place.
If you can't get the fill plug open.
Yeah, you don't want to take the bottom one out and drain it. Exactly. Although then you can go buy the little pump that they use in the marine world, because you know that most outdrives have to be filled from the bottom up. Okay,
I know.
So there's a way around most of these issues, but yeah, that's why you do take the top plug first and then the bottom, just to make sure it comes out.
Sorry, I had a little sidetrack there.
But anyhow, that's kind of my little short take on transmission, and the fact that people ask me, well, why do you change it every 30? You know, it says 60 in the book. And I said, yeah, but it says under, adverse conditions, it's 30. And I said, my Jeep tells me when I've had adverse conditions, it doesn't want to go into, and again, it's not like it just doesn't go in, you rev the engine and it goes clunk. No, it just sits there and goes, let me think of, all right, click, and it goes in, and it goes in softly, and now I drive 5 feet and it's fine. Yeah. And all I have to do is change the filter, change the fluids, and that goes away for another 29,000 miles. So that's just my take on the 42RLE and why I do recommend a full filter and fluid change.
And it never hurts on any, even with the JK, we had the 3.8. You know what I mean? It had the conventional filter underneath there. It's not a bad idea. It's a couple hours of your time. Yep. And we talked about lift maintenance last time. It's actually, lift maintenance is more evasive compared to something like that. And again, if you don't feel comfortable doing it, I'm sure a lot of shops local in the area will be willing to check it out.
Well, that's good. Yeah, they can do that. But and the thing is it gives you eyes on. Yeah. I look down. Scott looked at me funny because I look down as it drained, and I've got my tub, and I'm putting my finger in the fluid. And as he said, I'm rubbing my fingers together. How gritty is it? It wasn't gritty at all. Is it uniform in color? Is there white streaks or foam in it? Is there anything oddball? Is there dark streaks? That tells me that if there's any foam, water's gotten in. if it's white or milky, if it's strawberry colored rather than deep cherry red, like a cherry burgundy, then there's some issues. And so for me, it's a great diagnostics tool. Does it smell? It looks weird. Yeah, you rub your fingers, it's not gritty, and then I smell my fingers, and everybody goes, "Oh."
Ew.
Well, I'm trying to see, is a clutch burning?
Yeah.
Because guess what? Rebuilding a transmission with slightly burnt clutches is about the cheapest that you can get, because you haven't destroyed the drum. Just the friction material is on its way out.
Right.
On the other hand, you waiting until there's man glitter floating in the oil, and it's, ooh, look at all the silver rainbow in the oil, and it's burnt black. Start looking for a core in the junkyard.
That's what we talk about, like when it comes to changing gear oil and changing oils in general. Fluids are cheaper than rebuilds.
Yep, by far.
Yeah,
by far. So after we finished, excuse me, we got a frog in there.
Hey Kermit.
Yeah. After we finished up the trans on me, we grabbed lunch, and then we started Scott's little delayed project. Let's just put it this way. The supplies he brought, he had to take outside and blow the dust off. They've been sitting so long.
Over a year in my garage. But see, here's the interesting thing that I want to bring up is that not only does my Jeep go by many names, Exxon Valdez was one of them.
Yes.
So when we did the clutch, we looked up and we saw the Niagara Falls of oil coming from the back part of the valve cover. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have to address that. And Kevin goes, didn't you already buy the gasket? Yeah, same time I bought the oil pan.
Yep.
And I just had an archaeological dig on the dust on the oil pan box. I'm like, yeah, hush.
You don't have that part number, do you?
Yeah, it's like 1.
No. I'm talking about for that head valve cover gasket.
I do not.
Okay.
It ended in it was a Felpro VS something, but ended in G for the grommets.
That's the key.
That's the key,
folks. What we're going to talk about here is not so much about the valve cover itself. Okay, gaskets on valve covers, particularly on long straight engines that sit at weird angles, like if you ever looked at your Jeep engine, it's tail low. Oil pools at the back of the valve cover. The drain holes are a little bit forward. They don't sit right there back at the back of the casting of the head. Funny, because that's where it seals to the engine. So,
of course.
So there's a lot of oil there. There should be no pressure because your PCV system should be evacuating the gases, but it's a constant pool, and oil is engineered to creep into tight spaces. That's how it lubricates things, right? Mm-hmm. So
I think your doorbell's went off.
On that thought, we'll pause while I check the door.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up?
Good question. We found a hole in our garage. We were wondering if you can help us put it back together.
Okay.
It looks a little bit better.
Okay. Yeah. I can't do it right this minute.
No. I mean, yeah.
But absolutely. Be glad to help. Is it drywall hole?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
hole. Yeah.
Okay. We'll have to get a chunk of drywall, whatever side. We'll take a look at Lowe's. But yeah, sure. That'd be really easy to do.
We greatly appreciate that.
Okay. We're recording our show right now, so that's why I have to.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Well, there's no way you would know. I don't have a little red light that's recording the process, but in fact, I didn't hear. I had the headset on, so that's why I didn't hear the alarm go off, the doorbell. I've got Debbie's email. Can I email her and we can kind of set up a day and a time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this something that you need done fairly soon?
Yeah, before we leave.
When's that?
In about 2 weeks.
Okay. Oh yeah, we'll be well before that.
Yeah.
We'll be before that. All right. I will get back with you shortly. All right.
Okay, I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, great. Yeah, no problem.
So you can see that I was going and that side there, so that way you can see that as you fast forward, you can see the waving of my hands.
Are you rebooped?
Oh, I just
Oh, you left it on. Okay. Yeah. Well, sorry about that for the Patreons, and we'll edit it out for the regular, but
leave it quiet. I forgot what we were talking about. Oil
we
pooling
were talking.
at the back.
Oil cools at the back of the head. All right. So sorry, folks. Somebody at the door had to get that. I'm the only one home. Scott's here. All right. Now, one of the things we want to talk about real quick, though, is about the gasket. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the handling of the Jeep 4-liter valve cover gasket installation and why so many of them leak. Well, we started off with the first comment was oil is engineered to creep into tight spaces. That's what it's supposed to do, get between bearings. So it doesn't surprise me that it finds its way past these gaskets if things aren't spot on perfect.
Right.
And needless to say, we took yours off, and it wasn't really spot on perfect. Now, it did have a good gasket. It had
the same brand we took off.
It had a Felpro on there. But there are some things that you have to understand. And this is going to be hard to describe verbally, so bear with me, folks. Mm-hmm. When you look at the bolts that hold the valve cover down, the first thing I'm going to say is the bolts don't hold the valve cover down.
Right.
And that's going to confuse everybody. They go into what looks like a washer, a cup washer. But if you take one off, you'll see that it's not a washer. It's a little pipe, a flared top piece of pipe. That's the only way I know how to describe it.
Right.
About a 1/4-inch tube. I think it's about 3/8 of an inch long. And it comes up and flares out into that cup washer shape. That's all one piece of steel. Mm-hmm. All right. The bolt is tightened down until that little think of it as a mushroom with a hole through the middle. How's
almost
that work?
like a crush sleeve too.
Yeah. And the bolt goes through the middle of that, and when you tighten it, all you're doing is tightening that tube down to the cylinder head. Mm-hmm. What holds the valve cover down is the little rubber donut that's underneath. When you look at that domed washer, you'll see there's a little black, looks like a rubber washer. Mm-hmm. But and again, it's not exactly what it appears. It's not just a rubber washer. It has its own little sleeve that fits through a pretty large hole in the valve cover with little cleats that kind of lock it onto the bottom side of the valve cover. It's the fact that washer, once you seat that little tube washer, upside down mushroom, whatever you want to call it, when it's tight to the block, the rubber washer pushes down just enough on the valve cover to then have the valve cover push down on the valve cover gasket. So you have a sandwich here. Mm-hmm. And it came in about, as I understand, I found some literature from way back when, that people were, in fact, with cork gaskets particularly, over-tightening valve cover gaskets.
Right, crushing them,
causing them the cover itself to distort. And so you came up with this, Chrysler came up with this system, actually I think it was AMC that came up with it, where it's a controlled pressure system. You cannot apply more pressure to the valve cover, and hence the valve cover gasket, than what the little donut, will apply. And so, and you limit what you can apply to the donut by the fact that you've got that little sleeve that stands off the bolt. If you don't replace that donut, and the cheap valve covers, and even some of the better ones let you order them without replacement donuts, that's already given up its elasticity.
Yes.
And therefore, you can't tighten the valve cover gasket enough to not leak. You can do everything perfect, and it will still leak because you're not clamping it down. And then going to those things and ugga-dugga on them, thinking you're making them tighter, all you're doing is flattening the little tube and washer combo.
Yeah, which doesn't make it tighter.
Which does not make it tighter. If you do your own and you take the valve cover off, when you pull the bolts out, after you get the cover off, you can pop that assembly out and take your fingernail in there and work that washer off, and you'll see what I'm talking about what this washer really is not a washer. It's a tube with a flared head, and you can grab a new one that comes in the kit. Mm-hmm. Make sure you get the donut washers. You'll see they've got little teeth on the bottom on one side, and the other side's kind of flat. But you'll look at it, and Scott, you can post on our
Instagram page
the picture before and after. Mm-hmm. And when I did that, I showed him to him. He goes,
"That is a big difference."
Oh, wow!
Yeah,
and that's the huge difference in getting the 4-liter valve cover to actually seal. It doesn't take any RTV. It doesn't take any mystery. There is one trick that I will say that we used on yours.
Yep.
Because you are working with a silicon gasket with only very moderate clamping force, you need to make sure that silicon gasket gets comfortable. I don't know how else to describe it, that it doesn't get pushed one way, pushed the other way. It needs to settle down and be squished evenly. And the best way to do that is I've put a very, very, very thin coat of grease all the way around on both surfaces of that gasket. I just took my fingers, Scott saw me dip them into the little cup of grease and run it around like I was pulling pizza dough around the edge. And you really couldn't see the grease on the gasket material, could you?
No, but
you could tell it was slippery.
It was there, yeah.
And what that allows it to do is when you drop the gasket over, the better ones are on a very thin sheet metal frame that holds the silicon materials. And there's 2 alignment pins in the head that go into 2 holes in that frame. And it keeps it in the general vicinity, but it's not perfect. There's some give, and it lets it move around. So then you can put your head assembly together, your valve cover assembly together, get it worked past the coolant lines, past the ground connector,
past the back wiring in the back.
Yeah, all of that stuff, and drop it down. And then it is critical, absolutely critical, to finger start every single bolt. Do not tighten any of them until they're all there. And then I had Scott go around and just start with a small, I don't know if you guys have seen ratchet wheels. It's the head of a ratchet wrench, but no lever arm, just a wheel around it. And you just...
It's like a bolt UFO.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually used a 1/4-inch drive.
Yeah.
And then just to show meat paws here, I got out my inch-pound torque wrench. And it's funny, in this case, even my inch-pound torque wrench was kind of too big.
Yeah.
But I was able to set it to 55 inch-pounds. And he started off on a loose bolt, so it's just turning and turning and turning and turning and turning and turning, and he's kind of looking at me like he's getting worried. And then all of a sudden it started to draw up, and then he reaches over to give it that big tighten pull, and it goes clunk. He just touched it, and it goes thunk. And he kind of looked at me, and I said, "Yeah, go ahead, thunk, thunk." And he's like, "That's it, thunk, thunk."
Yeah.
And we went all the way around, and then back checked them, and they were all 55 inch-pounds perfectly, and it doesn't leak. Yeah. And we have proof of that because last week he comes in, screaming in, ugly face, ready to pop a gasket, bad mood. What's the matter? It's still leaking.
Yeah.
What's leaking? And he assumed it was the valve cover. And I said, okay, time out. We did replace your rear main seal
and the oil pan
3 months ago or something like that. Not every time you do that works right the first time. I'm sorry to say that. And I warned you of that then.
No, that's fine.
And I think that's where it's leaking. But I got my favorite trick, which is, I don't like burning my hands, but I take a rag, wrap it on a short stick, and then reach around and wipe the back of the head with the rag, pull it out, and it's like, no, it's just dry dirt. Yeah. So it's not your valve cover. And he went, well, that's good. I would have been really pissed off if I lost all that work.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're good. But that's the trick on the 4-liter valve cover.
I do want to talk about one thing, because we talked a little bit about the biopsy. When you said about crushing and everything, we actually looked at the old valve cover gasket, very similar how we looked at your oil pan or your transmission pan. And people would go, well, why are you staring at the old gasket? It's dead. Kevin, you were actually able to see where you tightened a little too tight. And then, but not by much. And then you see that you were starting to weep.
Yep. That was on my transmission. Yeah. And we found a notch in yours.
Where it might have cut or something.
Yeah, a fingernail, But yeah, I tend to do post-mortem on most parts, even if they're not really leaking or failing or whatever, because it's your one opportunity to look. Okay. And I was showing him that, this is what a used transmission gasket looks like. And we were going around. I said, look, here's a crush spot that it's got a little over ugga-dugged. And I'm guilty of that, and here's one that was a little loose, and you can see the weep pattern. Was it leaking? Well, technically, yes, but I never had to add transmission fluid. So
right.
I wouldn't call it a full-bore leak, but it left a moist spot on the back of the transmission. And again, the transmission in a Jeep sits at a pretty good angle. So where's the fluid all run?
All the way to the back
in. And so if there was a place I was going to have a gasket weep, it's going to be at the back end. And we could see that, and I was showing him how to read the gasket and read. And on the other hand, the good news, hey, it was a synthetic rubber gasket. It was a good brand. It was a Wix, which I'm very happy with. It came off clean. It didn't leave any residue. It didn't stick. It didn't have to be scraped off. So, to that end, these are just some of the subtleties if you're going to do your own work, and even if you're not, to look out for. If you're going to have a valve cover gasket done at a shop, make sure they replace the donuts on the bolts, because it's not a proper job if you don't. And this is one that will show up almost immediately with oil weepage. Done correctly, you're good until the whole system gets hard again, and usually it's around 100,000 miles, but otherwise, you're in good shape. Can you tighten them? Can you do things to the washers? You can. You can do anything. You can run your Jeep without oil. Is it a good idea? No. And I wouldn't mess with that. Their system works very, very well. I would leave it as is.
Kind of like the one-time head use bolts on some of the newer cars. I'll just use a handful of washers. Okay.
Once you've strained the metal, it does not.
I've been doing this for 20 years. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And let's see. What else did we want to talk about from the service? Because that wasn't all we did. Oh, yeah, we did also play with Clank. Scott did. What did you say? Pair of.
I'm going to take the helm on this. Really
you
quickly.
take a helm. Okay. On it. Even though I'm the guy with the greasy paws after beating that dog bone in.
Here's my whole thing. It is no secret there is a certain brand of lift that is my arch nemesis that shall remain nameless. I have been chasing bad bushings. And
you're losing the race, let me tell you.
Yeah, chasing. I only have two. I have one. If you look at the Instagram account with my steering stabilizer bushing. But so 4 months ago, I'm driving and I hear clunk, 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 clunk. I'm like, oh man, my shackle's loose. Nope, my
shackles on
the back of the Jeep. On the back of my Jeep, I did. The off-road shackles on the bumper.
Oh! I thought you were talking about leaf spring shackles.
No. And of course,
on your YJ.
And I go, oh wait, the shackle. Oh no! And because I remember when we rebuilt the front end.
Yes,
I grabbed the back of the bumper. I went clunk, clunk, clunk. I'm like, no, because we'd spent all that time getting rid of the clanking noises.
Yep.
That were driving me crazy to now have a left rear clank, 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 clank. And those who are asking why is the right rear replaced? Well, that was when I got rear-ended by the drunk driver.
Yeah.
But anyways, so what really makes me angry is I have an extra shock of that same brand with new bushing somewhere in the storage unit.
But it's buried deep.
So that's why I bought $12 and bought 2 new bushings.
$12 isn't too bad, but we did. For those that have ever done rear shocks on a TJ, you know what I'm talking about. There are 2 captured nuts up in the body, tucked in behind the corner of the gas tank that's why he lived with that noise for a while.
Yeah.
Because there was this trepidation of taking those bolts, because they have a wonderful way of going snap, bzzz, I'm going to hold on to your bolt and spin freely
for the rest of eternity.
Well, and there's some tricks to getting that off, but yes. So we were fortunate. We were able to, they came free with a little blast of impact, impetus before things let go.
Yeah.
And then get the bottom off, and then going, okay, in the act of removing the lower bolt, the lower bushing went yeah. I was like, I thought we were doing the upper. He says, oh, we are. There's just nothing left. There was a few shreds of orange goo left up there.
It looked like a tip of a blunderbuss.
Yeah, and so we took the aforementioned shock absorber over to the bench and wire brushed the dog bone. If you have a TJ, you know what the dog bone is, folks. It's the little tubular steel flattened at both ends with bolt holes in it at the top of the shock mounts too. It's the bane of the TJs. And greased it up, and then trying to hold on to this greasy dog bone. The bushing went in the shock with a easy smack of a hammer.
Yeah.
But then getting the dog bone through, which is, even if you put new shock in, you got to get the dog bone through. That was took several tries, a few choice words, a
proper application of crystal blue persuasion.
Yeah, and but then what was really funny was the bottom. So after all that, we got the top dog bone in, and I'm sitting here kind of wiping the greasy hands, and we got to put the bottom one in. And I said, oh yeah, I shouldn't clean my hand off. Let me, and I put it up there, and he goes, okay, so you're gonna get the clamp again and see if you can press it. And I said, no. Took the mallet, went whack.
Exactly.
And then we put the sleeve back in, and at that point it just became a reinstallation.
Yeah.
But he was one happy camper rolling out, and he backed out of the garage here at the studio area. And normally there's a
god-awful
gutter
bang
as you go across the little gutter area that you had a bang, and it kind of. He's like, oh my gosh, it's quiet. And then what'd you say, your neighbor, when you came home?
Well, because there was construction off my road, and you can hear me literally coming off the main road. Clank, 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 clank. He was sitting out there, smoking a cigarette, and I pull up, and he's like, oh, I didn't think you were home. I'm used to hearing the clanging. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good. The next one spits out.
Well, anyway, folks, the point of these is neither of these were these big rocket science build issues, okay? All three of them were simple maintenance items, but easy to do, maybe a little vexing, okay, trying to get the dog bone through, trying to, figure out where the oil leak is. But if you take your time, proper application of new parts,
proper applications of a rubber mallet.
Yeah, well, and then following the instructions in the service manual for torques, you can fix all these things yourself. And now we made a day of it. I'm not going to kid you. We probably put in 8 hours or so, but that included an hour going out to our local buffet that still is open, even though in this day and age, to go to the buffet you have to wash your hands, put on service gloves, and wear your mask.
I don't care.
I know it's good.
Shout out to Fred's because I had my fried green tomatoes that I never had in my entire life till I started hanging out with you, and I had my tomato gravy. Rice and catfish. I don't care. I'll wash my hands 3 times for that. I put 2 fingers up 3 times for that. Look, I can count good. Oh, speaking real quickly, guys, I have to say it. Because things are different now, and I had to go to the eye doctor. They don't like when you play jokes on them now.
Oh, no.
Because they go, can you read the bottom line? I said, yes. 1, 2, square, purple, a triangle. The eye doctor just stopped and looked at me like, what? And I'm going, I'm just kidding. She goes, not funny. I'm like, okay. I'm sorry. Excuse me for having humor.
Yeah, well, but, owning a Jeep means maintenance.
Yes.
I think, as Scott alluded to earlier, just owning a Jeep and driving it constitutes severe duty.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and that's funny because, in the owners, because I always read my owner's manual, and I know everyone's going to go, oh, man, read your owner's manual, nerd. Yeah, I do. And we always had, when we sold an engine at work, it said, warranty is only 12 months or 12,000 miles for police, fire, or taxi. I don't know, pencil in Jeep.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? And I'll say that my 42 RLE has 140,000 miles on it, and it still shifts and runs good. It could blow up tomorrow, but it's already made a very impressive record for being a trail transmission. And so we're looking at some other projects. Scott's Jeep, we were talking about power steering pumps. And
yeah, that's one thing we found that we'll tease a little bit is we were trying to chase down another clunk I had somewhere else, and I thought it was somewhere else, and Kevin goes, do it again. Clunk, 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 clunk. It's your box. I'm like, no.
Yeah, well, you have, like I did, the Mercedes box, which is not a bad steering box, not by the least, but it's an expensive box to replace, and it is subject to wear. And you have how many miles on?
155.
So mine needed to be replaced somewhere around 90. Okay, so you've gotten a lot further than I have. Now, he's fortunate for one reason. Guess what I have sitting under the bench? A brand new conversion box to the Saginaw, the Saginaw style box for the later model TJ. So the case has been modified and tapped to fit the Mercedes mount without a adapter plate. So it bolts in just like the factory box, but it's a Saginaw. He does have to get, when you start talking about a shorter, the older TJ steering lower shaft.
Yeah, 97 or 99, I think.
And that's fine. Actually, I think it goes all the way up to 02 before the Mercedes box came in. But regardless, I just bought a new one. That's a replacement available part. It wasn't that expensive.
No.
And then he started, well, do I need hoses? Do I need a pump? And I said, well, do pumps? And he asked what you said. Do pumps wear out?
Do pumps fail? Yeah.
And they do wear out. And that entailed me taking one of my junk things in my junk bin. I said, oh, here's a pump. And we opened the case.
Did a biopsy.
And I showed him how the vein pump of that works. Now, truthfully, they're about as indestructible as they can go. They run for frickin' ever, but they do wear out. They do have a high wear component in the impeller blades. More than the impeller blades, I showed him in this pump that looked good, looked like it had good blades, but whined like crazy, was in the orbit. That's what the little oval hole that the blades run in is called. It's the orbit. There was a big rust pit. And it didn't have rust in it, but you could tell that it was a cavity. So every time a blade went over there, the oil that was high pressure on one side of a blade shot over to the lower pressure side, not making it out to the steering column.
Right.
It probably cavitated. And, of course, at the rate those things turn and the number of blades in there, that was a constant squeal. So they're not really that terribly expensive. And we talked a little bit about the fact that you have pressure and you have volume, and most people want higher pressure pumps, and that'll drive the manufacturers crazy because it ain't the pressure.
It's the volume.
It's the volume. And so as we get into doing his, we will bring you that whole story when we swap out his box, look at the pump, see if we've got to replace it. And the only thing I'll tease you with on that is the pumps. Jeeps use a different bodied pump. The regular auto version will fit, and the auto stores will sell it to you. But the Jeep body has reinforcing ribs in it, and you've got to get that. Or when you tighten the pump onto the Jeep mounts, bing, crack, and it pees. Ask me how I know. So with that, I think we're like at 60 minutes right about now.
You mean 60? Yeah, 60 minutes. Yeah.
Yes.
Jeez Louise.
Who's the engineer on this show, Bucko?
Hold on. We talked about this earlier. You had the piece of paper on the wall.
Literally.
I said I had a piece of paper on the wall too. It just says I went training when I did Showbiz Pizza Place when I was like 9.
Regardless, folks, this is run long enough and been a pretty tech intensive show. I hope it's helpful for those of you who got the TJs that like to leave marks on their spot like a Harley. And of course, Scott always says, if it doesn't mark its spot, check it. It's probably out of oil.
And that was actually kind of scary because when I checked my oil, I didn't see a spot. I'm like, oh no. So I go down and buy the 2 quarts of oil, walk upstairs, and true to form like I am, pull the dipstick out. It was full. I'm like, cool, fixed itself. Just sit back in.
And on that note,
I'm not lying. I actually said that out loud.
I think we've done enough out loud talking. I would say it's time to lock Cubs and hit the trail, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, we got to put the Jeep before low first.
Yeah, we do.
Then we need to make sure we take nothing but pictures, memories, and our trash when we leave the trail.
Take your trash. We do want to have a trail open for our kids and our grandkids.
Exactly. And should you have a question for Kevin or myself, onthetrailpodcast@gmail.com.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye, patrons.
Bye.